He thought he was only going along to keep his daughter from driving alone in the rain. A simple thing. A Sunday errand. Nothing that could reach inside a man who had spent 20 years making sure nothing could reach him. But the moment Owen Darby stepped through the door of the Harlan County Animal Shelter, a small black and white dog came straight for him like it had been waiting since morning, and across the room, pressed against the far wall with her eyes fixed on the floor, another dog did not move at all. One ran to him. One refused to. Owen had no idea that before the afternoon was over, both of them would begin doing what no one and nothing else had managed in 3 years. Cold rain moved in flat sheets across Harlan, Kentucky, turning the Cumberland Mountains gray and shapeless above the town. Owen drove with one hand resting on the wheel, the windshield wipers keeping their steady, patient rhythm. He was 51 years old, built the way men are built, who have spent their lives in difficult places. Broad through the shoulders, spare everywhere else, with dark hair going silver at the temples, and a jaw that looked like it had been set against something once and never quite released. His eyes were a particular shade of green that people sometimes called calm and sometimes called unreachable, depending on how well they knew him. He had been both things at different times. Beside him sat his daughter, Callie, 26, slim and dark-haired like him, but with her mother's mouth and her mother's habit of talking around hard things by talking about easier ones. She worked as a nurse at the county hospital and volunteered Saturdays at the food pantry and believed, in the quiet, determined way some people believe, that the world rewarded effort and love if you kept offering them long enough. She was the reason Owen still answered the phone. She was the reason he still came to Sunday dinners. She was, if he was honest, the reason he had not entirely disappeared into the mountain cabin he'd bought 3 years ago with no particular plan, except to be somewhere that made no demands of him. Callie had decided to adopt a dog. Her apartment allowed one pet under 30 pounds. And she had been researching breeds for 2 months, with the same seriousness she applied to medication protocols. Owen had offered to drive because her car had a slow leak in the rear left tire that she kept meaning to fix, and because it was raining, and because he had learned long ago that the only way to stay useful was to show up before you were asked. The Harlan County Animal Shelter sat on a side road off the highway, a low brick building with a hand-painted sign and a gravel lot gone muddy in the rain. Inside smelled of pine cleaner, wet concrete, and something beneath both that was harder to name. The particular smell of animals waiting to be chosen. Callie went immediately to the front desk, already asking questions with the focused energy of someone who had prepared. Owen stayed near the door, hands in the pockets of his canvas work jacket, doing what he always did in unfamiliar rooms. Measured the space, located the exits, noted who was where and whether anyone looked tense. Old habit, it no longer asked permission. Then a shelter worker came through a side gate, and 2 dogs came with her. They were small, maybe 8 or 9 weeks old, both mixed breeds from the same litter the shelter had pulled, from under a collapsed outbuilding at the edge of town 2 weeks prior. The first was black and white with oversized paws and ears too large for his head, tail going like something mechanical, body so full of forward motion that he seemed to be running even when standing still. He found Owen in approximately 4 seconds, planted both front paws on Owen's boot, and looked up at him with the absolute conviction of an animal that had never once considered the possibility of rejection. Owen looked down. The dog sneezed. Well, Owen said. He had not planned to say anything. The second dog had not moved from the worker's side. She was darker, tawny and black along the spine, with a narrow face and eyes the color of creek water after rain. She was watching Owen with an attention that was not curiosity and not fear exactly, but something between the two. The careful measuring gaze of a creature that has learned the hard way that arrival does not mean safety. The shelter worker, a woman in her 40s named Deb, who had the no-nonsense warmth of someone who had loved too many animals for too short a time, watched Owen watching the second dog and said, "That one's Wren." Owen's head came up. The name on her card. She came in without one. We gave her that. Deb looked at the dog with the expression of a person trying not to get attached and failing. "The boy there is Scout, same litter. He's had 3 families come look at him this week. And her?" Deb was quiet a moment. "People pick him first. She hangs back. They don't get around to her." Owen looked at Wren. Wren looked at Owen. Scout was now attempting to remove Owen's bootlace with the methodical commitment of a small engineer. Callie appeared at Owen's elbow, her face already softened in the way it got around animals and small children, a face their mother had made too, though Owen had stopped letting himself notice that. She crouched and let Scout climb her knee, laughing when he tried to fit his entire nose into her jacket pocket. "They're siblings," Deb said. "We'd love to place them together, but the shelter's over capacity. If we can't find placement for both by end of week, we'll have to separate them and move Wren to the county facility." She paused. County facilities got a longer wait and a shorter outcome rate. The room went quieter than it had been. Scout had abandoned the bootlace and was now sitting on Owen's foot. Just sitting there, warm and dense and entirely unaware that he was pressing on something old. Wren had not moved, but her eyes had not left Owen's face. He drove home alone. Callie left with Scout tucked in a carrier, already naming him differently in her head, already planning the vet appointment. She had hugged Owen in the parking lot with both arms, and the particular fierceness she had inherited from a woman who had understood that love required physicality to be believed. Owen had held on a second longer than he meant to. The mountain road wound up through wet forest, the trees close on both sides, birches going silver-white in the headlights. Owen's cabin was 8 miles from town, a 2-bedroom log house with a stone fireplace, and a porch that faced the ridge and a workshop, out back where he spent most of his useful hours. He had bought it because it was quiet, because no one would come by without calling first, because grief needed space and he had given it the whole property. Inside the cabin held its usual shape, boots by the door, tools on the wall, one coffee mug on the counter, one chair pulled to the fire, one plate in the rack, a bookshelf of military history and 3 novels Callie had given him that he had read because she'd asked. A hallway leading to a room at the back he used for storage, which was what he called it, though storage was not really what it was. He sat by the fireplace with coffee and did not turn on the television. Usually silence was the thing he came home to. Tonight it felt like the wrong shape of silence. Too smooth, too complete. He thought of Wren's eyes, the careful measuring quality of them, the absolute lack of performance. He thought, against his will, of a dog he had not thought of in almost 4 years. A Belgian Malinois named Cole, lean and dark-muzzled and brilliant in the particular way. Working dogs are brilliant, less like intelligence and more like attention perfected into a force of nature. Cole had been assigned to Owen's unit on his last deployment, had served 2 years with a focus and loyalty that made grown men in difficult circumstances feel, irrationally, that things might be all right. Cole had given them the half-second that had mattered. He had not come home. Owen set his coffee on the side table and looked at the fire and thought about something else until the thinking held. He went to bed at 10, lay awake until 12, got up, stood at the kitchen window looking at the dark ridge, and was in the truck with his keys before he had fully decided anything. He told himself he was going to town for milk. The shelter opened at 8. Owen was in the parking lot at 7:43, rain dripping from the brim of his cap, hands in his jacket pockets, waiting with the expression of a man who would claim, if asked, that this had been a rational decision made in good time. Deb arrived at 7:58 and looked at him through the glass door for a moment before unlocking it. "She's still here?" Owen asked. "She's still here." He signed the paperwork at a folding table with a pen that skipped. Callie arrived 20 minutes later because Deb had called her, because Deb had a feeling, and Callie stood in the doorway of the kennel room with her hand over her mouth, watching her father crouch slowly on the cold concrete floor and extend one open hand toward a small dark dog that was trembling, faintly, but moving, one step then another, toward something she had not yet decided to trust. Owen did not reach for her. He waited. That had always been his way, though he had not thought of it as a skill. Patience under pressure, stillness as permission, the understanding that sometimes the bravest thing a body could do was hold its ground and not demand anything of the frightened thing in front of it. Wren's cold nose touched his knuckles. Owen exhaled. Callie made a sound she would later describe as involuntary. He brought Wren home on a Tuesday, with a canvas bag from the shelter containing a food recommendation, a worn blue blanket she had apparently claimed in the kennel, and a sheet of handwritten notes from Deb about what scared her and what helped and what to never do if you wanted to keep the progress you'd made. Owen read the notes twice in the parking lot before driving. The cabin received her in the way the cabin received most things, neutrally. Wren moved along the baseboards with her head low, not panicked but precise, cataloging the space in the careful, methodical way of an animal that has learned not to assume a room is safe just because it looks like one. Owen watched her from the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed and did not speak, and did not follow and did not rush. He had set out 2 bowls near the back wall, food and water both. Wren found the water after 6 minutes, drank 3 careful swallows, then moved away from it as if drinking too much might constitute a commitment she wasn't ready for. Owen almost smiled. She found the blue blanket he'd laid near the fireplace and stood over it for a long time without lying down. And Owen understood that too. The space between wanting rest and trusting yourself to take it. He had lived in that space for 3 years. He lowered himself to the floor with his back against the couch, legs stretched out, coffee beside him, and opened the novel Callie had given him at Christmas that he had not started. Wren looked at him for a long time from across the room. Then she lay down on the blanket, not curled tight the way frightened animals curl, but with her chin on her paws and her eyes still open, watching him with that creekwater gaze that asked nothing and missed nothing. Owen read 4 pages and retained approximately none of them. Callie came by that evening with groceries and a bag of high-quality kibble she had researched, and a container of homemade soup that she set on the stove before Owen could argue. She moved through his kitchen with the ease of someone who had been coming to this cabin, long enough to know where everything lived, which was the only kind of ease Owen allowed anymore. She noted Wren's position near the fireplace and noted her father's position on the floor and did not say a single thing about either, which was how he knew she was thinking several things. "She eat?" Callie asked. "Some." "She let you near her?" "Not yet." Callie ladled soup into 2 bowls and brought them to the coffee table and sat on the floor beside her father without being invited, which she had also been doing since she was 4 years old. They ate without talking. The fire popped. Wren watched them both with the air of a creature conducting an assessment that would not be rushed. "She looks like she thinks," Callie said eventually. "She does think," Owen said. "Watch her eyes." Callie watched. Owen watched Callie watching. The 3 of them held that quiet for a while, and it was, Owen thought without letting himself say it, the first evening in longer than he could easily count that the silence had felt inhabited rather than empty. 2 weeks passed. The Cumberland Mountains moved through the particular stillness of late October, cold coming in off the ridge at night, the hardwoods going amber and rust above the cabin. Owen kept to his routines because routines were what held a man's shape when nothing else was doing the job. Early morning, coffee, the workshop. Afternoons, a walk down the gravel road and back. Evenings, the fire, the book he was now actually reading, Wren on her blanket 6 feet away, then 5, then 4. She did not come to him. She moved toward him the way a tide moves, slowly and without announcement, as if the closing of distance were something that was simply happening to both of them equally. He did not press it. He understood the dignity of almost. He had lived in almost for 3 years himself. The night it changed was a Thursday. A cold front had come down from the north, and the wind was in the cabin walls, finding all the old gaps. Owen had built the fire high and was sitting in his chair with a glass of water and a quiet that had gone from bearable to difficult without his noticing the moment of transition. The wind had a sound on these nights that he did not talk about to anyone. It was not the wind itself, it was what it reminded him of. The way certain sounds carried in certain geographies, how a man's body remembered things his mind tried to negotiate away. He sat with it. That was what he did now instead of driving the mountain road at midnight. He sat with the difficult thing and waited for it to become manageable. Wren got up from her blanket. She crossed the room without hurry, without the hesitation she still showed during the days, and she stood in front of Owen's chair and looked at him for a long moment, her narrow face serious, her eyes asking something he could not name. Then she put her front paws on his knee, very gently, and rested her chin between them. Owen went still. He had been still in many situations, under fire, in hospital waiting rooms, in the front pew of a church in a small Kentucky town on a cold March day, watching a casket he was not ready to see. But this stillness was different. This stillness came from somewhere that was not training and not discipline and not the long practice of controlling what showed on his face. His hand moved to her head before he decided to move it. Wren closed her eyes. Owen sat there for a long time, with one hand on a small dog's head, while the wind pressed at the windows, and the fire burned low, and the particular grief that had been living in the right side of his chest for 3 years, which he had called manageable, and sometimes called fine, shifted slightly. Not left, not resolved, but shifted, the way something shifts when another warm thing presses against it. He thought of Cole. He let himself think of Cole. The way the dog had moved, precise and joyful and certain, the way he had leaned into Owen's hand during the brief quiet moments that deployment allowed, the way he had gone toward the thing in the road without being told, because that was simply who he was, and the way the half-second he had given them had been the last half-second he had. Owen had folded that half-second into silence and left it in the back room of his mind labeled discipline. It was not discipline. Wren pressed her chin more firmly into his knee. "I know," Owen said aloud, to no one in particular, and maybe to someone specific. He had not cried since the funeral. He did not cry now, not exactly. But something moved behind his eyes, and he let it move, and Wren stayed where she was, solid and warm and asking absolutely nothing, which was the only thing in 3 years that had been enough. The frost came early to Harlan that November, silvering the gravel and laying white along the ridge by morning. Owen had begun taking Wren on his afternoon walks, at first on leash, with her tight to his left side, then with longer lead, then in the back meadow behind the workshop off leash, where she moved through the tall grass with a loose, pleased trot that was the first entirely unguarded thing he had seen her do. She startled at sudden noises still. She kept him in her sight line constantly. But she no longer pressed herself against walls in unfamiliar rooms, and she had begun to offer something that in a person Owen would have called a dry sense of humor. A particular sidelong look she gave him when he said something she seemed to find questionable. He found himself explaining things to her. The weather, what he was building in the workshop, why the truck needed the particular maintenance it needed. He was aware this was not rational behavior. He did it anyway. Callie noticed. Callie noticed everything, which had always been both her gift and, occasionally, her trespass. She came by on a Saturday in early November with coffee, and the news that there was a veterans gathering at the Harlan Community Hall the following weekend. An informal thing organized by the county, a chance for the older veterans in the area to have lunch and share company. The local animal rescue organization had been invited to bring a few animals for a meet and greet. Callie had mentioned Wren to the organizer. Owen had known the shape of this visit before she finished her first sentence. "No," he said. "I didn't ask yet. I know what you're going to ask." Callie sat down at his kitchen table with both hands around her coffee cup and the particular patience she had inherited from a woman who had always known when to be still. "There's a man named Howard Breck," she said, 83 years old, Korea. He comes every month and sits by the window and doesn't talk to anyone. The nurses at the hospital know him because he comes in for his appointments alone and leaves alone. He had a dog for 15 years, lab mix. Dog died in the spring. Owen looked at his coffee. Wren appeared in the kitchen doorway, looked at Callie, looked at Owen, and went back to the living room with the air of a creature reserving judgment. "She might not do well in a crowd," Owen said. "She might surprise you." Outside, the frost on the meadow grass was softening in the thin November sun. Owen thought about Cole again as he increasingly allowed himself to do without punishment. Cole had been good in crowds, had been good everywhere, but especially in the places where Owen least expected goodness to hold. 1 hour, Owen said. Callie's expression did not change. Her eyes did. The Harlan Community Hall was a brick building on Main Street, with American flags flanking the door and the inside smell of coffee and institutional floor cleaner, and the particular density of many old coats in a heated room. Folding tables held lunch plates, paper coffee cups, pamphlets from the VA, handmade cookies under plastic wrap. Perhaps 40 veterans, most of them older, many of them wearing caps that carried names of ships and units and conflicts the country had long since filed away under history. Wren stayed close to Owen's left leg from the moment they entered. Not pressed against it, not panicked, but close in the way she was close on walks when the road curved, and she wanted to make sure she hadn't lost him. Her ears were up. Her eyes moved through the room with the systematic calm of a creature that has learned to assess first and decide after. Two other animals were there from the rescue, a large orange cat in a carrier who radiated complete contempt for the proceedings, and a beagle mix who had already made 3 friends and eaten 1 cookie he wasn't meant to have. Wren acknowledged both and returned her attention to Owen. They moved through the room slowly. Owen was not good at these gatherings. He knew how to be present in them, but he did not know how to make it feel natural, and he suspected most of the men in the room knew exactly the same thing about themselves. There was a particular recognition between veterans in social spaces, a mutual awareness of the gap between the self the world could see and the self that had been built somewhere else. He accepted a cup of coffee. He spoke to 2 men he half knew from town. He stood near the window for a while and let Wren be approached by a young woman from the rescue organization who crouched carefully and waited, and Wren allowed herself to be petted behind one ear, which Owen logged as progress. Then Wren left his side. She did not run. She moved with the same quiet purposefulness she brought to everything, across the open floor of the hall toward a table near the far wall where a man sat alone. Howard Breck was a thin man, tall, even-seated, with white hair combed flat and large, work-worn hands resting on the table in front of him. He had the particular stillness of very old soldiers, the kind of stillness that is not peace, but has learned to wear peace's face. His eyes were fixed on the middle distance, the place where old eyes go when the present room has become less real than the rooms that live in memory. He did not look up when Wren stopped beside his chair. She did not put her paws on him, did not press her head against him. She simply sat down on the floor beside his chair, very close, and was still. The room did not go quiet. It continued its low murmur of voices, and the scrape of chairs, and the sound of coffee cups on folding tables. But something changed in the quality of the air near Howard Breck's table. A few people nearby looked. Then, one by one, they looked away again, in the way people look away from something they recognize as private. Howard Breck's hands moved. Slowly, with the deliberateness of a man whose joints made everything a negotiation, he lowered one large weathered hand to Wren's head. Wren held herself still beneath it. Owen stood across the room with his coffee cooling in his hand and watched Howard Breck's face change. Not break. Not collapse. Change, the way a room changes when someone finally opens a window that has been shut too long. The old man's eyes came down from the middle distance and found the dog beside him, and something moved across his face that Owen recognized because he had felt it himself 12 days ago in his own chair by his own fire. The specific shock of being reached. Howard's mouth moved. Owen was too far away to hear it, but Wren's tail moved once, slow and low, and the old man's hand tightened gently in her fur, and Howard Breck, who according to Callie had not talked at these gatherings in 8 months, said something to the dog beside him that no one else in the room needed to hear. Owen looked at the floor. He breathed. Callie appeared at his elbow and did not say anything at all, which meant she understood exactly what was happening and had the grace not to frame it. After a while, Owen carried 2 fresh coffees to Howard Breck's table and sat down across from him. Howard looked up. Owen put 1 cup in front of him. Navy, Owen said by way of introduction. He didn't need to say more than that. Howard studied him for a moment with the measuring eye of a man who had spent a lifetime reading other men under pressure. Army, Howard said. His voice was dry and careful, the voice of someone who had gotten out of the habit of expecting conversation to last. Had a dog, lab, 14 years. Good dog? Howard's hand was still on Wren's head, only good thing in a long time. Owen nodded once. He knew the exact size and weight of that sentence. Good dog, too, he said. Howard looked down at Wren. Wren looked up at Howard. The orange cat made a sound of displeasure from across the room. Someone laughed. The room went on being a room. What's her name? Howard asked. Owen looked at Wren, who appeared to be listening to this with some interest. Wren, he said. Howard turned the name over. Small bird. Surprised me, too, Owen said. Turns out she's not. Howard almost smiled. Owen almost smiled back. 2 old soldiers and a small dog at a table in a community hall, and outside the window the November sky was the particular gray-blue of an afternoon that had decided it might allow a little more light before dark. Winter came and the cabin changed, not in the way renovations change a place, not with new furniture or cleaned corners. It changed the way rooms change when they stop holding their breath. There were paw prints on the porch, a chew toy under the coffee table, a second blanket by the fire. The back room, the one Owen called storage, still held its boxes and its folded flag and its weight. But the door stood open most days now, and sometimes in the afternoons the thin winter light came through the back window and lay across the floor of it, and Owen let it. He had not opened the box with Cole's things. He was not there yet. But he had taken the photograph off the shelf, where it had stood face down for 3 years, and set it upright. A picture of a lean, dark-muzzled dog sitting at attention in a place that had been very far from Kentucky. And some mornings when Owen came into the room for something else, he stopped and looked at it for a moment, the way you look at something you are learning to carry rather than hide. Callie noticed the photograph the first time she came by after he turned it over. She didn't say anything. She made coffee and fed Wren a piece of the biscuit she'd brought, and looked at the photograph for a moment, and then looked at her father, with an expression he recognized from her mother, which was the look of someone who has been hoping for a long time, and has just seen a small piece of evidence that the hoping was not wasted. Owen looked away before she could make him acknowledge it. But he poured coffee for both of them, which was what he did now, without having to be asked. Wren took her place on the floor between their chairs. Scout was coming for Christmas, Callie said. She was bringing him up to the cabin. Owen said the cabin was big enough for one dog, and Callie said she wasn't asking about the cabin. She was asking about Owen, and Owen said those were the same question. And Callie laughed in the way she laughed when he'd said something that was funnier than he'd intended it to be. Wren put her chin on Owen's boot. Outside, the first snow of December was beginning to come down over the Cumberland Ridge, light and quiet, the kind of snow that did not announce itself but simply appeared, covering the old ground in something clean. Owen had believed for 3 years that the best a man in his position could reasonably want was to be left alone with his loss. He had built the cabin around that belief, arranged his days inside it, kept the doors closed and the routines tight, and called it, when pressed, a form of peace. He understood now that he had been calling loneliness by a gentler name. The way a man will call a wound manageable when what he means is that he has stopped expecting it to heal. Wren shifted against his boot. From the kitchen came the smell of coffee and Callie's voice, on the phone now, telling someone, probably Howard Breck, whose number she had gotten from the community hall organizer, what time Christmas lunch would be, and whether he needed a ride. Owen heard his own name mentioned, heard her say he'd love to have you without consulting him. He looked down at the dog leaning against his foot. She does that, he said. Wren looked up at him with her creekwater eyes, patient and steady and entirely unconcerned. Owen leaned back in his chair, the snow came down, the fire settled, and somewhere between the dog at his feet and his daughter's voice in the next room, and the photograph standing upright on the shelf in the room he had finally stopped keeping locked, Owen Darby began, without ceremony, without announcement, the slow and necessary work of coming home.